Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Welcome back, folks. It's great to see you. I'm Avrum Rosensweig, and I'm here with my friend Neil Silvert. How you doing, Neil?
Thank God, just great. How are you?
I'm doing great. We're going to introduce you in 1 second. But
Okay.
before we do, I just want to say that my show, we're into the 32nd episode of this new iteration, and it is going quite well. We're very excited about it. Obviously, I've had a little bit of a bend towards Israel and the Jewish people since October 7th, and that's appropriate. But the goal of the show really is to highlight humankind, to honor humankind. And I do that through inspirational stories by people who are interesting and compelling. And the goal really of the show is for you and for me to really understand that we live in a magnificent world. We share an awesome earth together. And I think we need to understand that more so, in particular in these times, because there seems to be a certain negativity to these generations. As an example, when I go on Netflix or I go on Amazon or wherever I watch my movies from, I would have to say that 80%, if not higher, of the movies are about destruction, violence, and really awful people. And I could only say that there's a propensity with humankind nowadays to get out a lot of anger and that impending feeling of something about to be destroyed. And therefore we create such movies. But my goal is to flip that around on its ass, really, and to offer to people the idea, the vision, the audio, that in fact we have much beauty in our world, a lot, that it's incredible what we've created. Where we're at in 2024 is unbelievable, and where we're going is also just absolutely magnificent. So I want everybody to be aware of that. I want everybody to really take a look at their own lives and their soul, their spirit, and see where their gift lies and how they can make this world a better place and to pursue goodness and kindness.
Here.
Here. Right, exactly. Thank you, Neil. The show is brought to you by Avrum Rosensweig Art. That's AVRUM ROSENSWEIG. You'll see it at the bottom of my screen. ART, AvrumRosensweigArt.com. Take a look at my brand new website, and there you can buy original paintings that I've done, or prints, or merchandise. And I'm really deeply excited about it. Mother's Day is coming up. Father's Day is in June. And it's your opportunity to buy an Avrum Rosensweig print. And hopefully you'll enjoy that. So here we go. One last message before we dive in. I had a guest a number of weeks ago by the name of Nir Mammon. You may remember him. His picture is up in the corner right there with his little guy. Listen to the podcast. Nir is a brave, courageous warrior. And he's 47 years old. He's a father of 5, lives in Richmond Hill. And after October 7th, he went back to Israel to fight. Originally, he's an Israeli, and he's a warrior. Guess what? He came back home to be with his family, and now he's back in Israel again, and he will be fighting once again. What I want to ask you is, he is raising money to help soldiers with equipment. And there's a long discussion as to why Israel doesn't always have enough good equipment. It's mostly for reserves. And I would ask you please to consider donating to his cause. And I'm going to leave this up here for a little while. There's a bunch of letters and symbols and figures in there. Excuse me. And to consider donating. It's out of the States, and there is a receipt which will be offered for your donation. Do so generously. And let's support our IDF and our Israeli soldiers, and in particular, Nir Mammon. Ladies and gentlemen, with me today is Neil Silvert. And Neil and I have known each other since, as my mother would have said, since we were knee high to a grasshopper, since we were this big. Neil was born in Hamilton. He grew up in Kitchener. And of course, that's where I grew up. And I know him from the Jewish community there. He is a mortgage agent. He's a fellow who has his very own podcast. And we're going to talk about that throughout the show. And I think he has a lot to say about life, people whom he has met, and I really want to touch on our growing up years. So let's do that. Neil, welcome.
Thanks very much, Avrum. Thank you.
You're welcome. How's your podcast going?
We are having a ball, and I'm very excited because actually later this week, we begin our second year.
Mazel tov.
Thank you. Thank you. We're very excited. Can I name the name? Your Gray Matters?
Yeah. Name it throughout the show, actually.
Yeah, Your Gray Matters podcast.
It's very interesting. You've had Harvey Brownstone on it, who I had as well, and that's courtesy you. And I want to thank you so much because
my pleasure.
Sure. Harvey is renowned really throughout the world for his interviewing of Hollywood stars.
Yes.
And I was very grateful that you introduced me to him. So once
and
again,
you two were the best of the best. I have to tell you, your podcast was fabulous.
That was a good one, wasn't it?
Yeah. They're going to give you your own Hollywood star.
It's an interesting thing, though, Neil, is that given my druthers, honestly, I don't think I could do or want to do what Harvey does. You know why?
Yeah. No, tell me why.
Because I'll tell you why. I've interviewed some Hollywood stars, and it's a different breed, and it's a totally different interview.
Yep.
And I like guys like you.
Yeah.
Harvey's brilliant at it. He's wonderful at it. But I like to kind of get my hands dirty a little bit.
Yep.
Spend a little time in your Hamiltonian past, your Kitchener past, and what you do today. And I'm a pretty regular folk. That's what I am. And Harvey is really the elite. He was a judge. He really was a family judge and was magnificent at what he did. So that's for him, and this is for me, I think.
He is an amazing accomplisher, though, I have to say. The man is amazing.
He really is something, isn't he?
Yeah, it's very special.
Now, on your podcast, Your Gray Matters.
Yes.
And your logo's behind your head, right?
Yes.
I like that. Your Gray Matters. You've had your mom on there.
Yep, just last week. Yep.
I interviewed my mom, too, a few years ago.
Ah.
Wasn't it a very interesting experience?
It was actually. My mother is quite detailed, and I'm not. So periods and commas were still very important to her. But she tells an incredible story of 4 months of recovering in the Toronto hospital system, which included 3 different hospitals. Her message to the community is very joyful about our healthcare system, which is not something that we normally hear. Mm-hmm. And she specifically wanted to talk about it.
I watched some of your interview with her, and very often she would say to you, well, Neil, we're going off track here.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I told her that she won't be back on. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, exactly. We're not going to have you again, Mom.
Yeah, I was like, thanks, Mom. But I didn't cut it. I could have, but I left it in because that's the memory of my mom.
It's good you left it in because my mom, God bless her soul, was exactly the same.
Yeah.
She was telling me no matter when because I interviewed her, I told you, and it doesn't matter if we were on the air off, but she would tell me I'm her son, and she's going to tell me when I'm doing right or wrong.
Yes, and my mother has an incredibly detailed mind, as I remember. I think your mom did. So, and I don't. So that makes us perfect for a podcast.
Now you had your dentist on there.
Yeah, actually 2 dentists on who happened to be my stepson and his wife, which we didn't say on the show, but they're incredible dentists. And the whole point of it, Avrum, was the importance of the health of the mouth and how that really affects the rest of your body. Most people
oral health, it's called, right?
Yes, and I'm proudly married to a dental hygienist, so she's taught me so much. Where
can people see your podcast?
Well, if you go on YouTube, my channel is called Your Gray, Grey, Your Gray Matters. And that's the easiest way to find us. We're on the usual audio platforms too.
Okay.
New one every Monday morning.
Okay. Well, Muzzle Tough, congratulations to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, you were born in Hamilton,
Yep.
but soon made your way to Kitchener with your mom and dad
Yep.
and 4 other siblings.
Who came along in Kitchener, basically. Yep.
Yeah, they came along for the ride.
Yep.
What was your upbringing like? How would you qualify it?
Busy. It was tough, to be honest. We had some real challenges in the family when you have working parents and eventually 5 children. I like to say I was running a daycare center by the time I was 13 or 14, and that was because I had 4 siblings.
Yes.
And so it was interesting, many fun times, of course, but it was challenging, very challenging.
Well, you were the oldest,
Still am. Yep.
and are you de facto an older brother? Do you act like one?
Well, you know what? At the time I did growing up, then for a long time I wasn't that connected to my siblings, but the last few years I have been again, and we've been very close, and we generally speak a number of times per day. And so, yeah, so now there's a much better sibling relationship.
I mean, there's nothing like siblings, right?
That's a good and bad comment, but you're absolutely right. There's nothing like them. I love mine. They're very interesting, and we're all extremely different. But we've been pulled together in the service of our mother.
Well, what did your father do for a living?
So my father, when we originally moved to Kitchener, he opened up a lumber yard, which my grandfather had started in Hamilton.
Yeah.
This is going back to, I think I was 4 or 5 years old. So we're really going back. Then my dad ended up in the retail business and did many jobs. So at one point he was actually a bartender, but he spent a lot of time in retail.
Do you remember what he sold?
Well, at one point he was actually the manager of women's clothing for the old Kmart company. There was one out on Highway 8, which became the famous Lulu's.
That's
many
correct.
years later.
That is correct. You know what our relationship was to Kmart, my family's relationship?
No.
Every single summer from the time I was 5,
Yep.
excuse me, I would go to a camp in Michigan called Camp Gun Israel. It's what's called the Lubavitch Camp,
Right.
which is a sect of Judaism. And we would jump on a bus at Kmart, and it would take us all the way to Fenton, Michigan.
Oh, my Lord.
And I would go for the boys session, and my 4 sisters would go for the girls session.
Wow.
And, you know, Neil, I mean, times were so different then, weren't they? Like my sister Naomi, do you remember Naomi?
Oh, I do. Bless her heart.
Yeah. So she passed away,
Yeah.
and God bless her soul. And she went to camp in Fenton, Michigan as early as 3 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. Do you believe me?
Wow. 3 years old, my Lord.
3 years old.
And she wasn't a counselor till she was 5, probably.
Yeah, 5 or 6.
Wow, what a memory that was.
But times are different. Do you remember being a kid growing up in Kitchener? What area of the city did you grow up in, by the way?
So I grew up in Waterloo, and
Yeah.
I was out around Weber Road and Bridgeport Road. And I always remember the street was called Royal Street, which was an odd name for the area, but I'll take it. And
what kind of neighborhood was it?
Well, it certainly was a middle class to not so high income residential area, of course, but it was a tough street, to be honest. We had a steel factory on our street, and that steel factory was sort of our playground, which was a tough place to play. Well, they had a parking lot, and quite often the kids would just gather there to play, but quite often we'd pick up shards of sharp steel and be throwing them at each other. So it was I won't call it a rough, tough neighborhood, but it certainly had its specialties when you have a steel factory on the street, and they love to go hunting, the owners. So every year, imagine this nowadays, all summer long, there would normally be a dead moose or a dead bear or both hanging outside in the heat the whole summer on our street, just
Really?
hanging there. Yeah.
So you attracted flies from all over the world, I'm sure.
Oh, well, I'll tell you, it was interesting. It
Well,
was.
were you in fights as a kid?
Yes, I was. And I wasn't a very good one, very good fighter until I actually started taking martial arts at an age. And then I learned that you really shouldn't fight. But it was tough. I joined a young kids gang for a while. I to be honest, carried a weapon by the time I was 9. Not a serious weapon, but for me, it was something.
What was it? What was the weapon?
It was a knife made out of steel from the factory, actually.
Okay.
And I never used it. I never took it out of my pocket, but there was this weird confidence building that I had it. And fighting, yes, I used to have the heck beat out of me by a couple of neighborhood kids. And then, to be honest, I lost my temper one day and they pulled me off because I was just killing one of the kids. I hate even thinking about that. But I had a brother.
Yeah.
I have a brother who was a whole lot tougher, many years younger than me. And he rescued me from a gang attack, which was tough.
How did he do that? Do you remember how he did that?
I do. We were walking through the old Stanley Park Mall,
Yeah.
where my parents actually had one of the original stores. And my brother saw some guys giving me the gears. And in those days, you had like a 4-gallon plastic pitcher or bottle of milk. And my little brother comes up to the leader of the gang, takes this thing and smashes it across his face. Milk everywhere. It says, "Leave my brother alone." The guy said, "I love you, kid. I'll leave your brother alone." But
Whoa.
it was scary. I still remember it.
Well, was there any particular kid within the neighborhood that whom you remember who was troublesome, who bothered you a lot?
Not well, oddly enough, Avrum, in the beginning, that kid, I forget his name. It was Rick. I don't know his last name.
Yeah, I had a Rick too. Yeah.
It was that kind of a tough group, but actually I ended up joining his group. But the minute that they tried to get me to do what I thought was inappropriate things, I backed right away. But, because thank God I had that moral fiber from my parents to know right from wrong. And somehow I backed away. But in later years, like all of us, I guess, or maybe not, had to make that fork in the road decision of which way I wanted to go, the wrong way or the right way.
Now, in our discussions prior to the interview, one of the things that I'm asking my guests today, nowadays, if they're Jewish, is if they themselves have experienced anti-Semitism. And it seems as though you did, to the extent that you were dating a young girl in Kitchener or Waterloo. Her father found out. He was German, not happy about it, and started chasing you down the street with an axe.
He did, yelling, "Die, Jew, die."
What was the
And
outcome of that?
I wasn't a fast runner, but I was fast enough to get ahead of him and be able to run all the way home, which must have been like 5 miles. But it was scary, and I never forgot it because the very next day, a mutual friend of mine who had made the introduction to this young lady called me and said, overnight her dad sent her to Germany and we never saw her again.
Yeah.
And that was the end of it. I didn't experience overt anti-Semitism like that, but I was aware of it around me. But most of my friends who had a German background were very protective of me. That's what I found. There was almost like this need to disassociate from what had happened during the war.
Yeah, you tell an interesting story that some fellow was beating the crap out of you in school, and a very dear friend of yours who was German took this fellow on and protected you, and you had to break up that fight because your German buddy was beating the crap out of him, right?
Yeah, and it wasn't funny. It was in high school, and it was dangerous. That young man is still one of my close friends. And an interesting story of it was many years later when we were teens that he called me one night and asked me to come over, and he said that his father had just admitted to him that he had been in the Gestapo and nobody found it out when he came to Canada. And my friend, I think, is still dealing with that to this day.
How does he deal with that?
I don't know. I haven't spoken much, but I can tell you at the time for years, he disassociated from his family. He became from an outgoing, fun, dancing guy, always dancing, to a very depressed, quiet guy who was having a lot of trouble dealing with it. And the story could be actually a movie. Found
You
his
know,
long lost mother. It all fell into it. It was amazing.
yeah, that's a very compelling piece. You're very proud of your parents, and your mom is still with us, and
Yeah.
but generally you're very proud of them, right?
Yes, yes. I have lots of memories of different types, but I'm proud of my parents because they raised 5 kids. They never gave up and they kept going.
So you're in a position where you can, as we say in Yiddish, kvel. You can have nachas. You
I
can have Jewish pride of your parents. And of course, you're always hoping that they have and had pride in you. I've often thought, what is it like for those kids who wake up one morning and see their father on the front page of the Toronto Star? And this is actually a true story in my life. Um, and their father had been arrested for fraud. There was
my,
a buddy of mine, and it was a lovely guy, and that's what happened to him.
my God.
How do you come to grips with having a parent who is criminal versus we who had so much pride in our
Yeah.
parents, right?
Yeah. You know, it's a great question. I'm not going to presume to answer because I don't know how you could come to terms with that.
Yeah.
But there were times that there were real challenges in the family, especially my dad's health, and sometimes it was not pleasant. So I can somewhat relate to having anger too at a parent, and a lot of that was in the family too. But my
What?
dad was no criminal.
No, no. Thank God for that. Your dad died in 1991. How
Yeah,
old was he when he passed?
yeah, just 60.
Yeah. So my dad was 61.
I
What,
know.
what was that like, Neil, for you to lose your father, he being so young?
It was, I will tell you, it was very strange, Avram, because by then I was in Jewish community work and I had been living away from the family for quite a few years. I was in Winnipeg. And at the time of his passing, I was working in Ottawa. So, of course, I found it sad. I rushed home to bury him. But there was a certain amount of space, I think, from because I had seen him once in a while. In those days, you didn't hop on the internet and talk. And so I was sad. It was terrible. I still think of it today, but there was perhaps not that closeness because I was almost used to not having my parents in my life, so to speak, every single day. I'm more challenged by it now. I think about it quite a bit.
Oh, how so? How so? How were you challenged by
I
it?
always wonder about what could have been if he had lived another 20 years and seen grandkids and watched the kids grow up. That has brought me discomfort. Plus, he died of diabetes. I have diabetes. Thank God I'm a healthy diabetic. But I relate to some of the pain that I can imagine that he had, physical and mental distress that comes with diabetes. So, yeah, I'm sorry that he didn't live longer to see some of the great, great things that have happened.
What was he like, your dad? What was his character like?
Well, you know what's interesting? He was a very good man. He was a tough guy. He came from the tough streets of Hamilton,
Hmm.
and he had some health issues which made him unhappy at times, and we knew about it. But at the same time, he was always looking to make it work for his family, and it was tough because my mother worked full time too, nonstop. So you have two parents trying to keep it together in a marriage, to make a living together financially, and to have 5 kids going in 16 different directions at
Mhm.
the same time. But he was a very good man.
You know what I find also very fascinating is sort of comparing our generation growing up. I'm 64. I was born in 1960. You're a bit older. What year were you born?
54. I just turned 70.
Okay, congratulations. You're a great looking 70-year-old, by the way.
Thank you. I hung out with your eldest sister, by the way.
My sister Etty. Yeah,
Yeah.
she's almost 70.
Yeah.
But the point that I was going to make is in those days, whatever your socioeconomic status was, if you wanted 5 kids, you were going to have 5 kids.
Exactly.
My father was a rabbi, hence
Yeah.
my mother being a rebbitzin, a woman married to a rabbi.
Yeah.
We were middle class at best, not even upper middle class. And my parents, again, had 5 little bambinos. Today, what you often hear, and you're a mortgage agent, so you hear a lot of family stories.
Oh,
People
yeah.
go like this. They go, you know what, we're planning on having a child, probably not more, maybe 2, because we don't see ourselves being able to afford 5 or 4 or 3. And that's a big difference, isn't it?
Yes. Yes. You know, it's funny. I love all my siblings, and my youngest sister is 10 years younger than me, and she was absolutely a blessing to come along. I don't know if my parents were thinking about 5, but they did the right thing. So I'm glad to have her. But as you said, people do think very differently now, and there are considerations that people bring into this whole formula of how many kids they want to have.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Does that play into your positioning a client for a mortgage? Will that come up in a discussion?
Not really. I mean, we look at the whole situation with income coming in, money going out, how their expenses are, what they can afford to pay in a mortgage. So if you have lots of mouths to feed, they don't really say how much do you spend in groceries, but they do consider the expenses of the family. And there are formulae actually to figure out the cost of living versus the income. And they're very specific. And so it does come into the mortgage that way.
You know, Neil, I prior to every interview, I ask myself the question is, what do I want to find out from my guest? What do I want to learn from my guest? And I say, okay, what do I want to take away, or what do I want to impart in my interview with Neil Silvert? And one of the things was, I always remember you as a lovely human being, just a very, very kind, generous spirit. And, you know, again, when I asked you to hook me up with Harvey Brownstone, there were no qualms on your side.
Yeah.
So, you know, I felt immediately I wanted to reciprocate by having you as a guest.
Thank you.
But what I like about you is that when you do your podcast, at least in the beginning, your son Jason is on it, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So many discussions that you and I have had is about you and your wife traveling in going to various different islands, and how excited you sound about it and how excited she sounds about it. Am I correct to say that you know how to have a good family life?
Well, we've worked at it. You know, I went through a divorce, and the best part of that divorce is to this day, my first wife and I are very close. And Linda, my bride now, and my first bride are very close. We did a great job of melding families together. All the kids are best of friends, and we left that up to them.
How do you make that distinction between with your first wife? Well, you know, we were once intimate and now we're friends. A lot of people have a problem with that.
Yep. And that's okay. They can if they want. The friendship is a choice. Getting over past challenges that cause a divorce is a choice.
Yes.
And one thing that Linda and I both decided from day one is that nobody has the right to speak negatively about our former spouses, which sometimes people do, thinking that they're being helpful. And we very strongly reminded them that our children's genes come from their other parent. So
Yes.
no negative. And you know what? It worked out very, very well because, in fact, my late father-in-law once said, geez, if you guys got along that great when you were married as you do now, you might still be married. So,
Yes. Yeah.
and it was a great observation. But it's, to me, it's a decision and a choice of how you want to live with your children's other parent, even if you're not married to them.
Neil, what do you think that means? That adage or that saying or that idea that, well, I couldn't make it with them as a spouse, but we're great friends. Like, what's the distinction there?
Geez, that's a good question, Avrum. I would actually have to think about that.
Yeah.
I don't know how to answer that question, Avrum.
Can I wade out into that ocean a little bit?
Let's try.
Let's try. So I think when you're married, and you know this well, you're basically, it's not just Neil Silvert's life anymore.
Right.
You're building it with somebody else.
Yeah.
So if you decide you want to go out and spend $1,500 on a scooter, you can't just go do that.
Nor would I, but
Or would you?
you're quite right.
You're building a life with them,
Yes.
right? Whereas a friend, there's not too many friends that we build a life with.
Correct.
So it's more of an excitement about the interaction, telling a good joke, sharing a good experience. Whereas a wife or a husband or whatever your predilection, you're essentially saying is, well, honey, I want to spend this money. No, we can't because we're budgeting for our kids' university.
Right.
You become one with somebody.
Yes.
I think that might be the distinction. No?
Well, there's a definite distinction between being friends and being married for sure.
Yes.
However, and I think, and I have to give credit to my bride Linda. She and I are about to celebrate 25 years of marriage. We made conscious decisions of the kind of relationship that we were going to have with our former spouses. We didn't always have to do it together, and we didn't. Yeah. But it was always around a shalom bayit, peace in the house, because we also have the lives of 4 children to think about. There were absolutely ups and downs. There were challenges. There were disagreements. If there weren't, we'd still be married.
Yes, like
but
your dad.
The truth is, I believe it's a conscious decision of, are you going to find a way to have peace in the house? And it's an extended house, even when you're married to your second partner. That's the way Linda and I handled it from day one.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. There's a concept within Judaism called shalom bayit, which you just alluded to.
Yes.
Shalom bayit means peace in the house.
Correct.
And there are many, many laws, instructions as to what you need to do in order to make peace in the house. Here's one. The Talmud talks about this compendium of ideas and thoughts and debates, multi-generational. Let's say your wife comes up to you, your bride, you call her your bride. And I like that after 25 years.
Oh, for sure.
It's very beautiful. You keep like Eshet Chayil, you keep things very, very fresh. And she says to you, honey, I just bought this dress and I adore it. And I just want you to like it too. What do you think about it? And Neil, in your head, you're saying, oh, geez, I don't like that at all. What do you say to her?
I would say, I'm not sure if that's the right one, but if you love it, let's do it.
Okay. So for shalom bayit, you tell her, you know what? You look terrific in it.
It's not just shalom bayit. It is actually the way I believe it. It may not be my favorite, but if you love it, then you should do it.
And would Linda be okay with that response?
Yeah. I mean, we have no problem having serious talks, but we're interested in finding each other's joy. That's a big part of our life is joy.
What does she bring to you? How does she enhance your life?
Well, I was going to say I love having a massively beautiful woman on my arm.
Yes.
It's a part of what truth is. Linda has a heart that few people have. She understands searching for joy and that people are living their own lives and that it's okay for them to live their own lives, search for their own joy. If we don't like the way that their lives are going, we don't have to be with them. But Linda's greatness is searching for joy and finding joy for us, for herself first and foremost, and enjoying it for other people. And we've done some serious training to learn how to do that.
How well does she know you?
She knows me well, and I know her well, and it's one of the great things. And yet, as you said before, I call her my bride, and that spark is still there.
Nice.
I have to say to her every time I see her, it's like the first time.
That's beautiful.
I'll answer one other thing. Linda is incredibly brilliant and incredibly talented. She is a periodontal hygienist who's done things for people that I know have enhanced their lives, maybe saved their lives, and people wait just to talk with her. Mm-hmm. So I'll brag about her all day long.
Is there still mystery in your relationship?
Yeah, I never know what the heck's happening.
Not that sort of mystery.
Like in other words, no, I mean like sometimes we're running in different directions too. I'm like, would you mind telling me what I'm doing today? But
no, but I'm saying is, are there pockets of you, or are there sort of corners if you will, within Linda that you just haven't met yet?
You know what? I don't know that that exists now, Avram, but it took a
Yeah.
long while to get here. As much as I'm fun loving and joyful, as you said, so are Linda and I, we both had our own thoughts and our own processes and our own reactions from other things that happened in our life. But right now, communication for us is clear and comes forthcoming. And also, I think one develops a sixth sense about their partner if they want to. So we can sense when things are going on in each other's head.
Do you guys fight at all?
I can't remember the last time.
Wow.
We can talk things out, but we don't fight, and we will strive to figure out where we're going sometimes, but never in an angry way. Never.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, your life is very different than my life that way. I've never figured out a long-term intimate relationship. I'm not terribly good at it.
You know, years ago, Linda and I started a business when we first got married. We ended up in a multi-level, which we built to a six-figure income, but that had nothing to do with it. We went through the human training as well as the business training that I never got because I never got to go to post-secondary school. But we went through learning how to talk to people, learned respect. Didn't happen overnight. Great authors, great thinkers, great speakers we went to, motivational. And it so deeply helped us. I believe that we're married today with such a great marriage because of the wonderful training and fun that we went through many years ago. I remember one of my mentors met me and he said, here's this book called How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yeah.
Don't come back to a meeting till you've read it twice.
Yes.
And that was a bit of where I was at the time.
Do you remember the author of that book?
Yeah, Dale Carnegie.
Dale Carnegie. Outstanding
and the
book.
family still updates it on a regular basis.
Yeah, outstanding book.
Yeah. Written. It was originally written during the Depression.
That's correct.
But you know what it was, Avram, that was fascinating to me? I have a reading disability. I still do. And what my mentor was telling me was read this book. And I'll never forget, about 60 pages in, I found a handwritten note that said, congratulations for getting here. Give me a call. I'm taking you to lunch.
Yeah.
And that was the message.
Nice.
That
nice.
was the message, yeah.
You know, Neil, the other thing that I really appreciate about you is you're very authentic. You know, I don't think there's any errors about you. So when I asked you to send me information that we could deal with during the interview, there's a certain part of the document that you sent me which talks about things that you feel and thought about yourself and the world in which you live. Now, here's what you wrote me. The very first line, and I'll read it verbatim. It said, Avram, I'd like to talk about being a dummy and not even knowing that I was intelligent till I was 21 years old. Yeah. Tell me about that.
So it turns out that I have a reading disability. Even to this day, I have a very fine mind, but the stuff that my eyes see doesn't get up here very well. So I've actually read every book 5 times trying to understand it. Yes. But in grade 1 in Waterloo, I still remember to this day the horror of being in a grade 1 class, and every morning for the whole school year at 10 o'clock, I would hear the words from my teacher, and every day was the same. Neil, it's 10 o'clock. Time to go to the class for dummies. Go to the dummy class. Right. It was a remedial reading class, but the teacher said it's time to go to the class for dummies. Somehow, unfortunately, that got a hold of me. And I went through school thinking that I had nowhere to go and that I wasn't smart. And it took someone very close to me. At the age of 21, she happened to say to me, you have no idea how intelligent you are, do you? I said, well, I think I'm smart. I've made my way through. She said, no, you don't understand. The things that come out of your mouth, some of them are sometimes really rude, but it takes an incredible mind to come up with the way that you wittingly answer questions. Avram, to this day, I remember the shock at someone saying to me, you're intelligent. I'm sure my parents told me all the time, but it never got infused into myself till I heard that. And if I can be so bold, if you wouldn't mind. Many years later, and I didn't tell you about this, I don't know if you know Randy Taylor. Randy's one of the great motivational speakers in Canada, radio broadcaster.
You've told me about him, actually.
Yeah, and he was the one. I heard him speak. I called him years ago, asked him to come and have lunch, and I took him to lunch, and that's how I ended up being on stage as a speaker myself. But Randy heard my story and said, "Do you have any idea how important your story is?" And I started to tell it. Intelligence, or not knowing I was intelligence, was a part of that. But it was Randy that got me to understand that everybody's story is important. Everybody's story is magnificent. Doesn't matter where you start. It's where you want to go. So being unintelligent, turns out I was, just didn't know it.
In this area of which we are discussing, how did you raise your children? What did you impart to them?
Well, you know what? The biggest thing is love, especially when they're young and they went through a divorce. And so the biggest thing that we wanted to impart to our children, I certainly did to mine, is that they're loved. There's no barriers. There's nothing that they can't say to me, that they're always welcome, and that they have great, incredible gifts, which they do. These were the messages that we wanted to go through. And most importantly, you really do have feelings. People do. So have them.
And you were open to what your kids had to say to you.
Oh, yes. And that's why I have gray hair. I just got to do this.
What did you do when they told you stuff you didn't want to hear?
Oh, boy. You know what? You listen. I've learned a great thing. It's like medication. You don't want to react. You want to respond. So sometimes I'd have to think about things and then respond, not just quickly react.
Are you proud of yourself as a dad?
I am, actually. It took me a long time to find out that I'm a good dad. Linda still reinforces it. But yeah, I am very excited. Not only do I have a son who works with me on the podcast, but I have a brilliant daughter who's so creative. I never understand how the heck she does what she does.
Well, what does she do?
Well, she's unfortunately not well, so she hasn't been able to leave her home for years. But she's an artist, and for my 70th birthday, she created a video history of our life together. I didn't even know that she knows how to do that, and she did it. She's an amazing speaker. She's a published writer. Wow. And so she has incredible ability. She's a strong person for social justice, so we get to fight about that all the time. And we have just the best fun doing it. But yeah, it's incredible. All four of our kids are so exceptionally talented and bright. It's wonderful.
How old are you in your head?
In my head?
Yeah, in your head.
16, 17.
Yeah, so am I.
Yeah.
Why do you think?
Pardon me?
Why do you think that age?
I think because 16, 17 were rough when I was actually those years, so I decided to have them now. But I also just like the idea of learning, experiencing, having fun. But now I get to do it knowing that I'm intelligent.
Nice. Very nice.
That partially led to the podcast.
I want to just label that for a second.
Okay.
And just put it up on our bulletin board, okay? Our interview bulletin board.
Sure.
What's the lesson to take away from what you just said about how to speak to your children, what to say to them? What's the lesson?
Well, the biggest lesson to me is before you speak, listen. And listen with an open heart and both ears. Put down, and I had to learn this, put down your cell phone. Stop doing stuff. Listen. Because feelings aren't rational. They're just feelings. It's one of the great lessons that I learned. And if your children know that their feelings are important to you, and they should be as a parent, no matter what you're hearing, and you might turn gray, you have to listen. And then, to me, if you don't like it, it's better to respond later than react at the time, unless, God forbid, there's a health issue or something terrible that has to be dealt with right away. That's my takeaway. Children, no matter how old they are, have feelings, and they are bright, and they have something that you should listen to.
And I'll add a part B to that for our whiteboard. what I made every effort to do with my son growing up, he just turned 18, thank God,
Yes.
is to point things out to him about himself.
Yes.
And as much as I could to point things out that were in the positive. So if my son and I were having a conversation, Neil, and he came up with a wonderful opinion, like very compelling. You've been in those discussions with your
Oh, yeah.
kids. Your daughter, you were just mentioning how smart she is. I will say to him, honey, that is a very well produced or very well presented argument you're making. And he'll go, well, thank you, Daddy. And I'll go, no, sweetheart, that means your mind is working.
Yeah.
Like you're really making an effort to work through a thought and idea. And he'll go, oh, okay, good. And I have found that that is one of the most important things in raising children.
Oh, yes. Yes. Do you know, I was going to say, I really do believe in this joy thing. I didn't know about it for years, but your kids are just seeking their own joy, the same as we all are.
Mm, mm.
But joy comes from listening to people. If they need help or guidance, they'll let you know generally. But, I have my son, Jason, who you mentioned on the show, at a young age became one of the best debaters ever.
Yeah.
I mean, he just has this fine mind for facts. Man, that made it hard on me sometimes because I was just looking for the fun. But the truth is, when they're detailed and they have a brilliant mind, if you want to get along, you have to listen. And sometimes I would bite my tongue and be shocked, but their thoughts were important. And that's what I think is the most important thing.
Would you say to Jason, I don't know? I just don't know.
Yeah, I would. I don't know if he would say that when I was younger, before I started learning things. Maybe I didn't. But because I was also in community work, you learned to be a listener more than a judger. Judging someone to me doesn't make sense.
So, in terms of the things that you sent me, I'm going to read another piece verbatim. You said, excuse me, I'd like to talk about how I dreamed as a child to walk on the moon and ultimately helped in a small way to build the first Canadian space arm.
Yeah.
How so?
So I have a brother who's an incredibly talented mechanical. He's a mechanic, mathematical guy.
What's his name?
Russell. And brilliant. And he's the mechanic and the detail and the mathematician like my mom. And if I see a nut and a bolt, I don't actually know what you do with them. But for decades, I sold nuts and bolts. And I ended up, before I went into community work, running a factory in Toronto for very specialized little fasteners, things that hold things together. I really did have a dream of her my whole life to walk on the moon. In fact, when I'm on stage talking about it, I always ask people, so what was the name of the first guy who jumped onto the moon?
Neil Armstrong. Neil.
I'm Neil. And I love to say that. But the truth of the matter is, I dreamed about it. People made fun of me. They chortled. They said, because that's what people did in the early 60s, talking about jumping on the moon. Fast forward, now it's in the 70s. I'm running the factory for the company that I work for. And in comes this gentleman one day into my office with the president of our company to say, this gentleman's from Spar Aerospace. And we need you to have your factory make the following parts because it's going into this thing called this Canadian space arm. And we made them, and it went in, and they went into outer space. And in some way, I got to touch my dream of helping in the space race.
How was that for you?
I talk about it to this day. It was moving. It was... At the time, I didn't realize how it related to my dream to walk on the moon. But to this day, I'm proud of it. And we would take these little gold fasteners, no technology in those days of finding the dust that was escaping from the gold. And we would put a little piece of nylon in them. So when the rocket went up and the arm went out, the vibration didn't knock the fasteners out. They were tiny. And I worked with a lady who had great eyesight, and we were able to put those in, but they went into the space arm.
Let me ask you a question. In your imagination, would you say your imagination is fertile?
I think so.
Yeah, mine is too. So, in your imagination, can you see in your mind's eye the space arm and that little fastener that you contributed? Can you actually see it?
I do. I see it all the time in my
Right.
head. I don't see so much the fastener. And that's interesting that you raise that. But I see that arm going out, doing what it did, and knowing that in some small way, a part of me was up there. That
How,
was fulfilling a dream.
I'm so happy for you. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
How do you see life in those terms, Neil? Like this whole tapestry that we as humankind create, one person is involved in the creation of a movie that inspires others to go out and run a marathon. Another person is, creating furniture that is cutting edge. Like, how do you see the whole tapestry of humankind in the context of you being part of something that went up into space?
Sure. Well, let me tell you, Avram, I'll go to my podcast and call it, it's called Your Gray Matters, but the theme is that the human mind cannot be defeated.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
that's actually the answer to your question. Every single human mind contributes. It's part of that tapestry. And I first heard that from a speaker on stage. The human mind cannot be defeated. We will always find a way. And that was his whole talk. But I didn't know that day in 1995 that would lead to this podcast and to my belief that we will always find a way. And I think that's the easiest way to tell you I have great belief that we will overcome anything.
Are we doing well enough, Neil, humankind?
Now we can always do better, but while we love to try and focus on all the negative, and as you see Netflix focused on the negative, I see wonderful things that we humans do. We do know how to feed ourselves. We do know how to take care of others. It comes down to a choice. Yes, we do know how to make bullets and rockets and guns, but we also know how to make peace with our
Yes.
enemies. And even what's going on in the Middle East, I truly believe will lead to greater long lasting peace among the nations. I hate what's going on, but I believe our human mind will figure it out and we will find something better. And that, I think, is the way that I try to live my life.
Yeah, I love that point of view, and I love your sort of mental, intellectual disposition having to do with that, because I am on the same page as you.
Yeah.
The thing that I hope for is that all of humankind, or much of humankind, recognizes what you just said,
Yes. Yes.
recognizes how brilliant we are.
We are touched. We are people with choices,
Yes,
and our choices are ours. What we do with them is for ourselves. It's also part of a collective.
very much.
My nephew just came out with a book, Jeff Karp. He was learning disabled. He had challenges all through school, and today's recognized one of the most important professors at Harvard and MIT, and he's done businesses and sold them. He just did his book launch last week. A nice Jewish boy from Peterborough ends up being one of the big shots in the world. And you know what his book's about? The 12 ways that our life can be better. And he gets his inspiration from nature. And I learned that from him. He can look at things in nature and come up, and he's done this with medical devices that save people's lives every day.
Yes.
And he finds the answer in things like the foot of a gecko lizard. And I love to think of that way too. The answers to everything are right here.
Yes.
Right here.
What's his name? What's the name of the book?
Jeff Karp, and it's LIT, L-I-T. It's life's, oh boy, he's going to kill me. I'll send you a picture.
Or we can just, our listeners or viewers can see it on Amazon under Jeff Karp.
Yes, L-I-T under Dr. Jeff Karp, PhD.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, at U of T last week for his book launch, there was standing room only, and everywhere that he goes. But this is a learning disabled kid who not only conquered it, but saves people's lives every single day. And the book took him 7 years. He was been on my podcast twice.
Hurrah!
Just love him.
Hurrah!
Yeah.
What do you think of my new mug, by the way?
I love this mug, and I'd like to know when I'm getting mine. I love that picture of you. That's a great picture.
Harvey Brownstone. Thank
Yeah.
you, by the way.
Yes.
He critiqued my show.
Mm,
And one thing he told me was, Avrum, you got to clean up a little bit. So you see, I cut my hair.
yeah.
It was a mistake. The barber didn't speak English. He was Russian, and he cut it all off. But it worked out.
Yeah.
The other thing was, he said, and I really appreciate people who see the nuances of life. He said, you got to get a mug
Yeah.
with your show's logo on it. And he's correct, isn't he, Neil?
Yes. And I'm just thinking about my own, actually. But everybody,
Yeah, you got to get one.
I want to come up with something different. I don't know what it is. Maybe I'll find a little screw for a Canada space arm. Says Your Gray Matters on it. I will just pay tribute to Harvey because, and I think that you would know this. When I first opened my podcast, I wrote to him. I didn't know who he was. Somebody said, write to Harvey Brownstone. So I wrote him. Hi, Harvey, just started a podcast. I hope someday to meet you. I didn't ask him to come on or anything. And he wrote back with the words, of course I'm coming on your podcast.
Yeah, he's great that way.
Yeah,
Yes.
he's a blessing to all of us. And his story, I'm trying to get the rights to his movie, but he's just not playing that card yet.
That's because he sold them to me.
Thank you,
Neil,
partner.
in conclusion,
Yes.
here's another thing that you wrote me. Let's touch on this
Okay.
to wrap up our wonderful interview. You've been great, by the way.
Thank you, and you too. Thank you.
Yeah, you're terrific. Thank you. You write like this. You go, I'd like to tell you about the hug that I got a couple of years ago from a young Ethiopian man when I was in Kitchener. He figured out that the work we had done with bringing Ethiopian Jews to Israel resulted in him being born in Israel. He never would have been born if his grandparents had not been rescued, or born in Israel, if they had not been rescued by the type of work that you and I did, Avram. And I guess you were referring to some of the work I did with Ethiopian Jews. So comment on that, Neil.
Absolutely. I happened to be in Kitchener many years ago by a referral from a friend to look at a car. So Linda and I drove to go and look at this car, and the young sales guy never did sell me the car, but we were sitting and having a coffee a few weeks after. I fell so in love with this kid that I went back to have a coffee with him. And while we were talking, I said to him, okay, I know that you're Canadian, but where were you born? He said, I was born in Israel. I said, oh, it's interesting. Where's your family from? Ethiopia. And I said to him, gee, I used to do Jewish community work, and my very first job was to help in the rescue of when we brought Jews from Ethiopia to Israel to help them in their lives. This kid got up, probably in his 20s, came over, threw his arms around me, gave me a kiss on my cheek, and said, that's how my grandparents got to Israel. They were in danger, and I was born years later, but thank you for what you did. And Avrum will say the same to you because
thank you.
But that is a moving story that I tell, and I'll tell you, sometimes I wonder about the work that you do in Jewish community work lovingly, but I wonder about the time. Then I reflect on a story like that, and it makes a difference.
Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today has been Neil Silvert. He's a fellow that I grew up with in Kitchener, and it was wonderful to reminisce, and it's wonderful to hear your insight on your life, Linda's life, your children's lives, and basically humankind. What I find about you, Neil, as I mentioned before, is that you're extremely rich in spirit. You're very, very wealthy when it comes to purpose and meaning.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. You have lots of ideas about life. I know that you're learning all the time. You're in a constant state of growth. And that means a lot to me, and it means a lot to many people. So thank you so much for being who you are, really.
Thank you. Thank you. And Avrum, I can't tell you how honored I am,
Thank
not
you.
only to be on your show, but to have connected with you again in the last year and a half. It's a privilege. That's just how I'll define being with you.
I appreciate you saying that very much. Thank you. I really do. I want to remind people that the link that you see at the bottom of the screen is that of Nir Mammons. Nir was on my show a few weeks ago. He lives in Toronto. He has 5 children. He just went back on Thursday to Israel to fight for the Jewish people and for Israel. And this is not his first time doing so. So please jot down that link and contribute to his fundraiser, which is to help his colleagues, his fellow warriors, purchase equipment that is suitable for war and the defense of the Jewish people. As to why that's necessary, it's a long story, but trust me on it, because I've raised money for similar things. Israel, in some ways, lacks in terms of good equipment. I want to ask people, too, if they would go to my website at avrumrosensweigart.com and take a look at my art. It's available in terms of originals, prints, and also merchandise. And there's some really nice gifts there that are highly affordable for Mother's Day and for Father's Day coming up in June. Other than that, I would request strongly that you pursue your own gift, that you try to find that place which I call the zone, that area inside of you, which one could say God created you for that purpose. Like Neil was created in order to make sure that those in space had a reasonable arm to use, right, to do research, right, exactly, so that humankind could go further. But of course, that's not the only reason. But everybody says, every single researcher into human existence says, when you find that place, you find a lot of joy and you find a lot of happiness. And interestingly, a lot of things fall into place. Look for it inside of you. One way of doing it is walk through library stacks and see where you automatically stop. You may stop at cooking recipes. You might be a chef, right? You might stop in the biology area and pick up a book and want to read about nephrons. That's all I remember from grade 12.
Boy, you have a good memory.
That's all I remember. And you may, who knows, be some medical personnel, a doctor perhaps. Do it. You'll find your happiness that way. And if you found it, well, good for you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching my show. It's been a delight to have you. We have a great show coming up in the next couple of days with Neshama Carlbach, who is the daughter of the great Shlomo Carlbach. And she's going to speak about her recent participation in March of the Living, which is many, many, many young Jewish children going to Auschwitz, to Poland, and then subsequently going to Israel at this time in the calendar when we remember the Holocaust and we celebrate the existence of the state of Israel. And this week as well, I'll be speaking to Phyllis Taylor. She's the prison lady. You know Phyllis?
I had her on my show.
You had her on your show.
Ladies and gentlemen, get ready for the best ride ever.
Yeah, the good one, right?
She is magnificent.
It's like, what's it called? That crazy ride at Wonderland, Big or something.
Oh, yeah. I don't know what it's called, but it's fun.
You go down backwards.
Oh yeah, you're leaning over thinking that you're falling
barfing.
Out. But Phyllis, oh my God, she is magnificent. What a
prison lady. Prison lady.
Yep.
Okay, we will see you shortly. Thank you once again. Have a beautiful day and a beautiful week. You've been listening and watching the Avrum Rosensweig Show. Take care.